All right. Hey. Welcome back to Adult Brain Audiobooks. I'm Graham, one of the narrators, and we are doing an experimental live read again here. So I'm going to edit this as I go, just show you that there are humans in the background here, and this is how I do these books, edit them. Not exactly how, because I would use full screens if I wasn't going live here, but I will share like my a monitor with half screens with the PDF that I read from and the audio recording software that I use. And this we're in book 2 right now of the Magus, or Celestial Intelligencer, being a complete system of occult philosophy, written in 1801. So this is kind of in the fun book. It's the grimoire, more so of a grimoire. So I'm going to do like a little warning here for information entertainment purposes only. We do not recommend practicing any part of this book seriously unless you are an adept. This is I think it's important to get out there, but I don't think people should be playing around with it necessarily. I mean, to each his own, but I'm not endorsing any of these practices. So we're going to get into the fun part. Just this will probably be a fairly short one, chapters 6 to 10, basically, which are, let me see, book 2 here, of witchcraft, in particular, of the vital spirit, of the magical power, of exciting or stirring up the magical virtue. And the last one, chapter 10, is of the magical virtue of the soul and the medium it acts by. And then that is the end of magnetism. So, and then we'll get into Cabalistic magic next, maybe tomorrow, I guess. We had the power was out this morning, so I was kind of scrambling around a bit. Just came on in time to do this. So let's share my screen here, and we'll jump right into it. I'm going to try and be as smooth as possible, but this is the raw process here. Excuse me. So I'm going to just do a quick test. Check. That's working okay. All right, here we go. Chapter 6 of Witchcraft. Let a witch therefore be granted who can strongly torment an absent man by an image of wax, by imprecation or cursing, by enchantment, or also by a foregoing touch alone. For here we speak nothing of sorceries, because they are those which kill only by poison, inasmuch as every common apothecary can imitate those things. That this act is diabolical, no man doubts. However, it is profitable to discern how much Satan and how much the witch can contribute hereunto. The first supposition. First of all, thou shalt take notice that Satan is the sworn and irreconcilable enemy of man, and to be so accounted by all, unless anyone had rather have him to be his friend. And therefore he most readily procures whatsoever mischief he is able to cause or wish unto us, and that without doubt and neglect. The second supposition. And then, although he be an enemy to witches themselves, for as much as he is also a most malicious enemy to all mankind in general, yet in regard they are his bond slaves and those of his kingdom, he never, unless against his will, betrays them or discovers them to be judges. I'm just going to redo that quickly. Scroll, expand that out. Just move it back a bit. Yet excuse me. Yet in regard they are his bond slaves and those of his kingdom, he never, unless against his will, betrays them or discovers them to judges, etc. From the former supposition I conclude that if Satan were able of himself to kill a man who is guilty of deadly sin, he would never delay it. But he doth not kill him, therefore he cannot. Notwithstanding, the witch doth oftentimes kill, hence also she can kill the same man, no otherwise than as a privy murderer, at the liberty of his own will, slays anyone with a sword. There is therefore a certain power of the witch in this action, which belongs not to Satan, and consequently Satan is not the principal efficient and executor of that murder. For otherwise, if he were the executioner thereof, he would in no wise stand in need of the witch as his assistant, but he alone had soon taken the greatest part of men out of the way. Surely most miserable were the conditions of mortals who should be subject to such a tyrant, and stand liable to his commands. We have too faithful a God, then, that he should subject the work of his own hands to the arbitrary dominion of Satan. Therefore, in this act, there is a certain power plainly proper and natural to the witch which belongs not to Satan. Moreover, of what nature, extent, and quality that power may be, we must more exactly sift out. In the first place, it is manifest that it is of no corporeal strength of the male sex, for neither doth there concur any strong touching of the extreme parts of the body, and witches are for the most part feeble, impotent, and malicious old women. Therefore there must needs be some other power far superior to a corporeal attempt, yet natural to man. This power therefore was to be seated in that part wherein we most nearly resemble the image of God, and although all things do also, after some sort, represent that venerable image, yet because man doth most elegantly, properly, and nearly do that, therefore the image of God in man doth far outshine, bear, rifle over, and command the images of God in all other creatures. For peradventure, by this prerogative all things are put under his feet. Wherefore if God act per nutum, or by a beck, namely by his word, so ought man to act some things only by his beck or will, if he ought to be called his true image. For neither is that new, is that troublesome, is that proper to God alone. For Satan, the most vile abject of creatures, doth also locally move bodies per nutum, or by his beck alone, seeing he hath not extremities or corporeal organs, whereby to touch, move, or also to snatch a new body to himself. That privilege therefore ought not less to belong to the inward man, as he is a spirit, if he ought to represent the image of God, and that indeed not all idle one. If we call this faculty magical, and thou being badly instructed, art terrified at this word, thou mayest, for me, call it a spiritual strength or efficacy. For truly we are nothing solicitous about names. I always, as immediately as I can, cast an eye upon the thing itself. That magical power, therefore, is in the inward man, whether thou, by this etymology or true word, understandest the soul or the vital spirit thereof, it is now indifferent to us, since there is a certain proportion to the let me just redo that quickly. Since there is a It's good. Semicolons. Thank you, the semicolons. Since there is a certain proportion of the internal man towards the external in all things, glowing or growing after its own manner, which is an appropriated disposition and proportioned properly. Wherefore the power or faculty must needs be dispersed throughout the whole man, in the soul indeed more vigorous, but in the flesh and blood far more remiss. Chapter 7. Of the vital spirit, etc. The vital spirit in the flesh and blood performs the office of the soul. That is, it is the same spirit in the outward man which, in the seed, forms the whole figure, the magnificent structure and perfect delineation of man, and which hath known the ends of things to be done, because it contains them, and the which as president accompanies the new framed young, even unto this period. Let me scroll up here a bit. I want to go back a little farther there and catch the beginning of that sentence. And the witch, not the witch, the witch. And the which, although it depart therewith some smacks or small quantity, at least thereof remains in a carcass slain by violence, being as it were most exactly co-fermented with the same. But from a dead carcass that was extinct of its own accord, and from nature failing as well, the implanted as inflowing spirit passed forth at once. For which reason physicians divide this spirit into the implanted or mummial and inflowing or acquired spirit, which departs. To wit, with the former life and this influxing spirit, they afterwards subdivide into the natural, vital, and animal spirit. But we likewise do here comprehend them all at once in one single word. The soul, therefore, being wholly a spirit, could never move or stir up the vital spirit, being indeed corporeal, much less flesh and bones, unless a certain natural power, yet magical and spiritual, did descend from the soul into the spirit and body. After what sort, I pray, could the corporeal spirit obey the commands of the soul, unless there should be a command from her for moving of the spirit and afterwards the body? But after but after but against this magical motive faculty thou wilt forthwith object that power is limited within her composed body and her own natural in. Therefore, although we call this soul a magicianess, yet it shall be only a wresting and abuse of the name. For truly, the true and superstitious magic draws not its foundation from the soul, seeing this same soul is not able to move, alter, or excite anything out of its own body. I answer that this power and that natural magic of the soul which she exerciseth not of herself, by virtue of the image of God, doth now lie hid as an obscure in man, as it were, as I got that wrong, as an obscure, as obscure image of God. I'm going to have to redo that whole sentence. I'm going to go back to the beginning of that paragraph there. I answer that this power and that natural magic of the soul which she exerciseth not of herself, by virtue of the image of God, doth now lie hid as obscure in man, and as it were lie asleep since the fall or corruption of Adam, and stands in need of stirring up. I'm not going to redo that. All which particulars we shall anon in their proper place prove, which same power, how drowsy and as it were drunk soever, it otherwise remains daily in us, yet it is sufficient to perform its offices in its own body. Just have to check something quickly here. So we're on the next chapter here, chapter 8. Chapter 8 of the magical power, etc. Therefore, the knowledge and power magical, and that faculty in man which acteth only per nutum, seems. Let me just redo that quickly. I just gotta focus. Therefore, the knowledge. Therefore, the no. Therefore, the knowledge and power magical, and that faculty in man which acteth only per nutum, sleeps since the knowledge of the apple was eaten. And as long as this knowledge, which is of the flesh and blood, gross and material belonging to the external man and darkness, flourishes, the more noble magical power is lying dormant. But because in sleep this outward or sensual knowledge is sometimes dormant, hence it is that our dreams are sometimes prophetical, and God himself is therefore near unto man in dreams, through that effect, viz., when the more inward magic of the soul being uninterrupted by the flesh diffuses itself on every side into the understanding, even as when it sinks into itself. Let me just redo that part quickly. even as when it sinks itself into the inferior powers thereof, it safely leads those who walk in their sleep by moving or conducting them, whither those that were awake could not surmount or climb. Therefore, we establish this point, viz., that there is inherent in the soul a certain magical virtue given her by God, naturally proper and belonging to her, in as much as we are his image and engravement. And in this respect, she acts also in a peculiar manner, i.e., spiritually on an object at a distance, and that more powerfully than by any corporeal assistance. For seeing the soul as the principal part of the body, therefore all action belonging to her is spiritual, magical, and of the greatest validity, which power man is able, by the art of the Kabbalah, to excite in himself at his own pleasure. And these, as we have before said, are called adepts, who are governed by the Spirit of God. Thus we have endeavored to shew that man predominates over all other creatures that are corporeal, and that by his magical faculty he is able to subdue the magical virtues of all other things, which predominance of man, or the soul's natural magic, some have ignorantly attributed solely to verses, charms, signs, characters, etc., by which hierarchy or holy dominion inherent in man, those effects, whatever they may be, are wrought, which some, who but too corporeal philosophize, have attributed to the dominion of Satan. High and sacred is the force of the microcosmical spirit, which, as is evident in pregnant women, stamps upon the young the image and properties of a thing desired, as we have before instanced in a cherry, which, without the trunk of a tree, brings forth a true cherry, that is flesh and blood, ennobled with the properties and powers of the more inward or real cherry, by the conception of the imagination alone, from whence are two necessary consequences. First, that all the spirits, and as it were the essences of all things, lie hid in us, and are born and brought forth only by the working, power, and fantasy of the microcosm. The second is that the soul, in conceiving, generates a certain idea of the thing conceived, the which, as it before lay hid unknown, like fire in a flint, so by the stirring up of the fantasy there is produced a certain real idea, which is not a naked quality, but something like a substance hanging in suspense between a body and a spirit, that is the soul. That middle being is so spiritual that it is not plainly exempted from a corporeal condition, since the actions of the soul are limited on the body, and the inferior orders of faculties de-ending upon it, nor yet so corporeal. I'm going to cheat this one. I'm going to cheat this one and not do the whole sentence again. I'm just going to try and split it up here. That D ending, that spelling mistake caught me. Nor yet so corporeal that it may be enclosed by dimensions, which we have also related to be only proper to a seminal being. This ideal entity, therefore, when it falls out of the invisible and intellectual world of the microcosm, it puts on a body, and then it is first enclosed by the limitation of place and numbers. The object of the understanding is in itself a naked and pure essence, not an accident, by the consent of practical, that is, mystical divines. Therefore, this proteus, or transferable essence, the understanding doth, as it were, put on and clothe itself with this conceived essence. But because every body, whether external or internal, hath its own making. Let me redo that quickly. But because every body, whether external or internal, hath its making in its own proper image, the understanding knows or discerns not. The will loves and wills not. The memory recollects not, but by images or likenesses. The understanding, therefore, puts on this same image of its object. And because the soul is the pure simple form of the body, which turns itself about to every member, therefore the acting understanding cannot have two images at once, but first one and then the other. He who is wholly the life created all things and hath said, nothing is to be expected as dead out of his hand. Likewise, nothing can come to our view wherein himself is not clearly apparent or present. For it is said, "The Spirit of the Lord hath filled the whole globe of the earth." And again, that he containeth or comprehendeth all things. Therefore, there is nothing in being, no creature, but what possesses a certain degree of divine fire and life, yet lying dormant or unexcited, till stirred up by the art, power, and operation of man. Chapter 9. Of the exciting or stirring up the magical virtue. Every magical virtue, therefore, stands in need of an excitement by which a certain spiritual vapor is stirred up, by reason whereof the fantasy which profoundly sleeps is awakened. And there begins an action of the corporeal spirit as a medium, which is that of magnetism and is excited by a foregoing touch. There is a magical virtue, being as it were abstracted from the body, which is wrought by the stirring up of the power of the soul, from whence there are made most potent procreations and most famous impressions and strong effects, so that nature is on every side a magicianess and acts by her own fantasy, and by how much the more spiritual her fantasy is, so much the more powerful it is. Therefore, the denomination of magic is truly proportionable or concordant. Now, the highest sort of magic is that which is stirred up from an intellectual conception, and indeed that of the inward man is only to be excited by the Holy Spirit and by his gift, the Kabbalah. But that of the external man is stirred up by a strong imagination, by a daily and heightened speculation, and in witches by the devil. But the magical virtue of the exhaled I'm just going to redo that quickly. But the magic But the magical virtue of the exhaled spiritus vapor or subtle. But the magical virtue of the exhaled spirituous vapor or subtle spirits sent from the body, which before lay in potentia or by way of possibility only, is either excited by a more strong imagination, the magician making use of the blood as a medium and establishing his kindled entity thereon, or by the ascending fantasy of the weapon salve, the excitress of the property living in the blood, else by a foregoing appointment or disposition of the blood unto corruption, viz., whereby the elements are disposed into a separation, and the essences which cannot purify. That was the opposite of what was written there. I better redo that. Putrefy. Which cannot purify. The essences. I'm going to just redo the whereby the which whereby the check whereby the elements are disposed into a whereby the elements are disposed unto a separation, and the essences which cannot putrefy, and the essential fantasies which lay hid in the properties come forth into action. The fantasy, therefore, of any subject whatsoever has obtained a strong appetite to the spirit of another thing, for the moving of some certain thing in place, for the attracting, repelling, or expulsion thereof. And there and not elsewhere we acknowledge magnetism as the natural magical endowment of that thing firmly planted in it by God. There is therefore a certain formal property separated from sympathetical and abstruse qualities, because the motive fantasy of these qualities do not directly fly unto a local motion, but only to an alternative motion of the object. Now it is sufficient that if a man happens to receive many wounds in his body, blood be had only from one of these wounds. Blood be. Should I double check is this right at the beginning of this? Oh, right there. He had only from one of these wounds. Okay, I'm just checking quickly here. My backup PDF to see what it might be a typo, but I think they got this verbiage from the PDF that I'm checking the backup of. So just checking here. Chapter 4. Oh, I got it. Okay, this is just book 2 only. So, if a man happens to receive blood, B had only, yeah. Well, that doesn't help. It's the same thing. If a man happens to receive many wounds in his body, blood B had only from he had only from one of these wounds. Blood he had only from one of these wounds, and from this one, the rest are cured also, because that blood keeps a concordant harmony with the spirit of the whole, and draws forth from the same the offensive quality communicated, not only to the lips of the wound, but to the whole man. For from one wound only the whole man is liable to grow feverish. Therefore, the outchased blood being received on the weapon is introduced into the magnetic unguent. For then the fantasy of the blood, being otherwise as yet drowsy and slow to action, being stirred up by the virtue of the magnetic unguent, and there finding the balsamic virtue of it, desires the quality induced into it to be bestowed on itself throughout, and from thence by a spiritual magnetism to draw out all the strange tincture of the wound, which, seeing it cannot fitly enough effect by itself, it implores the aid of the moss, blood, fat, and mummy, which are conjoined together in such a balsam, which not but by its own fantasy becomes also medicinal, magnetical, and is also attractor of all the strange qualities out of the body, whose fresh blood, abounding with spirit, is carried unto it, whether it shall be that of a man or any other living creature. The fantasy, therefore, is a returner or reducible and ecstatical from part of the blood that is fresh and newly brought unto the unguent. But the magnetic attraction began in the blood is perfected by the medicinal virtue of the unguent. Not that the unguent draws the infirmity of the wound unto itself, but it alters the blood newly brought into it, in its spirit, and makes it medicinal, and stirs up the power thereof. From thence it contracts a certain medicinal value. That was wrong. From thence it contracts a certain medicinal virtue, which returns unto its whole body to correct the spirit of the blood throughout the whole man. Now to manifest a great mystery, viz., to shew that in man there is placed a great efficacy whereby he may able. Can I redo that one quickly? Now to manifest a. Check. Where was I? Now to manifest a great mystery, viz., to shew that in man there is placed a great efficacy whereby he may be able to, only by his back. Now, to manifest a great mystery, viz., to shew that in man there is placed a great efficacy whereby he may be able only by his beck, as we before mentioned, nod or fantasy, to act out of himself. Sorry, I burped there. And I'm going to cheat this one. And to imprint a virtue, a certain influence which afterwards perseveres or constantly subsists by itself and acts upon objects at a very great distance, by which only mystery, those things which we have spoken relative to ideal entity conveyed in a spiritual fuel and departing far from home to execute its offices, concerning the magnetism of all things begotten in the imagination of man, as in that which is proper to everything, and also concerning the magical superiority of man over all other bodies. will plainly and conspicuously appear. Chapter 10 of the magical virtue of the soul and the mediums by which it acts. Something more we will add before we dismiss the present subject, which is that if a nail, dart, knife, or sword, or any other iron instrument be thrust into the heart of a horse, it will bind and withhold the spirit of a witch, and conjoin it with the mummial spirit of the horse, whereby they may be burnt in the fire together. And by that the witch is tormented, as by a sting or burning, by which means she may be shown. All right, sorry about that. Excuse me. And I have to just check this and redo that part. And by that, the witch is tormented, as by a sting or burning, by which means she may be shown. Got to figure out where to cut this one. It's a long sentence. I don't want to go all the way back to the beginning. I would be more accurate doing this on my own for sure. I would go all the way back to the paragraph, but when I'm doing this live one, it'll just have to be whereby this is kind of weird. It reminds me of Cold Iron, like the fantasy properties of Cold Iron. They may be burnt in the fire together. I'm going to do it right after that. Burnt in the fire together. And by that, the witch is tormented, as by a sting or burning, by which means she may be known, so that she who is offensive to God and destructive to mortal men may be taken away from society according to the law of God. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. For if the work be limited to any outward object, that work the magical soul never attempts without a medium or mean. Therefore it makes use of the nail or sword or knife or any other thing as aforesaid. Now this being proved, then man hath a power of acting per nutum, or by his nod, or of moving any object remotely placed. It has also been sufficiently confirmed by the same natural example, that this efficacy was also given unto man by God. And as every magical faculty lies dormant and has need of excitement or stirring up, which is always true, if the object whereon is to act, which is always true. I'll start it from there. Which is always true if the object whereon is which is always true if the object whereon it is to act is not nearly disposed, if its internal fantasy doth not wholly confirm, which is always true if the object whereon it is to act is not nearly disposed, if its internal fantasy doth not wholly conform to the impression of the agent, or also if the patient be equal in strength or superior to the agent therein. But, on the contrary, where the object is plainly and nearly disposed, as steel is, for the receiving of magnetism, then the patient, without much stirring up, the alone fantasy of the more outward man being drawn out to the work and bound up to any suitable mean, yields to the magnetism. Therefore, we repeat, the magician must always make use of the medium, for then the words or forms of sacraments do always operate, because from the work performed. But the reason why exorcisms, conjurations, charms, incantations, etc., do sometimes fail of their desired effect is because the unexcited mind or spirit of the exorcist renders the words dull or ineffectual. Therefore, no man can be happy or successful magician. Just properly read that sentence. Therefore, no man can be a happy or successful magician but him who knows how to stir up the magical virtue of his soul, or can do it practically without science. And there can be no nearer medium of magnetism than human blood with human blood. and no sympathetic remedies, magnetical or attractive, but from the idea or fantasy of the operator impressing upon it a virtue and efficacy from the excited power in his own soul. And now, to bring our magnetic treatise to a total conclusion, we have to say that whoever, through ignorance or obstinacy, will say there is no validity or reason or reality in the science of magnetism proves himself unworthy the sacred name of philosopher, because he condemns what he knows nothing at all about. For those who will give themselves the leisure to examine the truth of those things which we have taught will not find their expectation deceived, therefore will not condemn. But whoever should be so superstitious as to attribute a natural effect so created by God and bestowed on the creature unto the power and craft of the devil, he filches the honor due to the omnipotent Creator, and reproachfully applies the same unto Satan, the which under favor will be found to express idolatry and blasphemy. There are three, so says the strip. Let me redo that quickly. There are three, as says the scripture, who bear record in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are only one. There are three that bear record on earth, the blood, the spirit, and the water, and these three are only one. We therefore who have like We therefore who have the like humanity contain blood and spirit of a co-like unity, and the action of the blood is merely spiritual. Therefore in Genesis it is not called by the etymology of blood, but is made remarkable by the name of a red spirit. Therefore, let those who would attain knowledge in these things and be perfect in what we have set before them constantly meditate and desire that the first cause and archetype of all things would graciously and mercifully illuminate their minds, without which they grope but in darkness and uncertainty, and are subject to the delusions of impure spirits and devils, who are only to be put to flight. Just going to redo that last sentence there. It's a long sentence. I'm going to do it without which. Right there. Oh, excuse me. Without which they grope but in darkness and uncertainty, and are subject to the delusions of impure spirits and devils, who are only to be put to flight by putting on the whole armor of God, in whom we all live, move, breathe, and have our being. End of magnetism. So this is that's it for now. Tomorrow I'll do a little bit of this. This is where it's going to get really interesting. The Kabbalah, or the secret mysteries of ceremonial magic illustrated. There's some pretty interesting things coming up here. Going to be some challenging pronunciations probably, but anyways, yeah, that's it. It's going to get more into the sort of grimoire portion. There's some pretty weird stuff coming up. Yeah, thanks for checking it out. Check out the rest of our channel. We have a huge catalog of audiobooks here, also on Spotify and Audible. Trying to do this, make a living doing this. So your support is greatly appreciated. Share the channel, like us, and subscribe, all that kind of stuff, the regular stuff. So thanks for being here. Check out the live tab for the book 1 of this MAGUS and the chapters up till now. Thanks, and we'll see you tomorrow.